Well, that was relaxing. Welcome all. We're live. So I want to welcome everybody who joined us today. I have the great pleasure to introduce AJ Yon, who is the CEO and co-founder for BiteCheck. Welcome.
Thanks, David. I'm happy to be here. Excited to be here with you, and just looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we get started? So first of all, we kind of made a comment. I made a comment about your, your hat, and you mentioned to me that the provider, we're not going to name names, basically sent you a blank T-shirt, and
Yeah.
and I mentioned to but maybe you can say what happens then, like after they sent a blank T-shirt. What happened? How did they fix that?
Yeah, so we were getting the gear, everything was looking good. We were really excited about all of the gear that came in, and then one of the shipments showed up, and it was a sweater that we ordered, and there was nothing on it, no BiteCheck logo or anything. And we were like, what is this? We ordered stuff with the BiteCheck logo, and we reached out to them, and they said, okay, cool, but send us the blank sweater back. So we had to mail the sweater back to them. They put the logo on it and sent it back, and even though we love the gear that we currently have, we're probably going to end up moving off to a different provider just because it wasn't the mistakes, it was the reaction to the mistake, right? It was, we thought there would be a little bit more of service provided after you sent a blank sweater.
and this is when I mentioned that it's something they don't teach you at MBA school. They teach you SWOT analysis and, doing a lot of analytics on spreadsheets and so on, but the opportunity to make amends and shine after something goes wrong, it's something that is very, very. Let me see here. Let me just see here. You lost my audio. Can you hear me?
I got you now.
Okay, good. So yeah, the opportunity to shine when something goes wrong is tremendous because. After the fact, again, when everything goes right, people don't remember. It's not because the assumption is you're going to do okay. And the only time that, people remember if something goes wrong, and then they remember how people, how they felt when you fixed it or if you didn't fix it. And this is something that, I guess when you're running your own business, it's something that you can continuously, use to your advantage. And you know what, we don't sell widgets, right? So you're a CEO and a co-founder of a technology company that deals with compliance, and there's a lot of moving parts, right? There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and I always said that we sell widgets. So the opportunity to come back to the customer after something happened is tremendous. So maybe this is something, lessons to be learned here. So maybe kind of jump right through it. And what's your background? AJ, how did you become a CEO and a co-founder of a startup company?
I ask myself that question every day. How did I get here? Because it's still surreal when people announce and say I'm the CEO and co-founder of something. But I've been in the cybersecurity industry for a little bit over a decade. I spent most of that time in the United States Army here as a commissioned officer, working in an information security capacity. Anyone that has served in the military knows that the folks responsible for communication, while that's their job and that's what they're important, they just get yelled at a lot because technology's hard and communication's hard. So sometimes it doesn't work and people don't understand why it doesn't work. So I got yelled at a lot for 6 years in the military. Decided I didn't want to be yelled at anymore and went to go work in cybersecurity compliance consulting, where I was able to help grow a practice from about single-digit team to over 130 folks, and we did everything from SOC 2 to ISO to HIPAA to HITRUST. And I just realized while I was there that the compliance process was backwards. The way that we were doing it lacked innovation, it lacked technology, and there was a gap between what the compliance assessment was supposed to accomplish, which is prove that an organization is secure. There was a gap between that and the actual result, because the results of these assessments were not proving security or not increasing the security value of the organization. They were just check the box exercises. So I, went with my co-founder who I met at that firm. We set out with BiteCheck to, our tagline says it, make compliance suck less. We know the process is tough for a lot of people, and it's tough for both the auditors and the clients. And we decided that there should be a tool out there that helps automate this process. It helps make it easier for folks and get security value out of it. That's what we really care about. compliance and security should be tied in hand. They shouldn't be opposing forces, and it's what we're building here at ByteCheck.
And I love the tagline. I think we should make everything suck less.
Exactly.
There are just so many things out there. I think once you become an adult, you figure out like, okay, there's just so many areas in life that you can fix, and compliance is just one of the areas. So, tell me a bit about when you hear compliance. What does that mean to you? You have a lot of experience with running these, these teams that went in, I guess, manually reviewed compliance areas within an organization. Why even is there a thing called compliance? Why not just let companies do whatever they want?
Yeah, that's what I was going to start out about when you asked what does it mean to me. Is it means an organization. The thing about compliance that everybody should understand, especially in cybersecurity, is people aren't undergoing these assessments just for fun. They're not doing it because they're like, yeah, I want to go and have an auditor come look at my environment. That would be really cool. That's not what's going on here. They're being asked to do this by either a vendor, a customer, an investor, a potential purchaser, whoever it may be. They're being asked to prove, hey, are you guys secure? Or if we do business with you, are you going to be able to protect our data? And the way that that's accomplished is these third-party assessments, these third-party audits that require in the SOC 2 world, a certified public accountant to come in and audit your environment. And it's a required thing nowadays because everybody's hosted on the cloud. It's required to do business. You're required to show during the contract negotiation process, I am secure. So for me, compliance is about a required business process. So think of it the same way when you hire someone. There's certain things that just happen, especially here in the U.S. There's certain documents that are signed, certain processes, and those are just, everybody knows that it's going to happen. You know that as you get hired, you're probably going to have a background check. Depending on what the level is, who knows, but you're probably going to have a background check, right? 99% of companies. And compliance is one of those things that cybersecurity professionals, if you've been in the industry for a while, it's coming. It's coming down the road. You're going to have to do it eventually. And what I hope in the future, we hear compliance isn't security, which I 100% agree. You can get a compliance report and not be secure. But I hope in the future, when people think about compliance, they think about security, because security can be compliance. If you focus on security, you'll meet any of these thousands of frameworks that are out there. They're all saying the same things. They're all telling you to have, protect privileged users, vulnerability scans, pen tests, all these other things that are common. They're saying the same stuff. So of focusing on the things that matter, which is security, and letting the compliance stuff work itself out.
And AJ, why not let companies govern themselves? Because compliance is kind of it seems like almost like an overhead for the cost of doing business, right? And we see an increase, compliance in all different areas of business. So not just security, but it's like like even diversity, other areas of the business, financials and so on. Why not let companies just, this is a capitalist society, right? Or so we hope, right? Why not let companies kind of decide on their own what's right, what's wrong? If they're gonna just mess up because of lack of security controls, for example, they bound to get hacked, and then they're bound to go out of business, right? So why not kind of let them do their thing?
Yeah, it all comes back to capitalism. The businesses that want to do business with them won't pay them if they're not secure. So they, in order to make money, these companies, because you can govern yourselves. That's the thing about compliance that a lot of people I don't think understand, is while it's one of those things that's required for, quote unquote, required for doing business, you could choose not to do it. You might not last too long. You might not be able to secure too many deals, but you can choose to not do it. And I think it goes to your point, David. It's the capitalist society we live in. Businesses, to make money, they have to sign these contracts with bigger companies, and the bigger companies are saying, in order for me to give you this $1 million contract, you have to prove that you're secure. And that's unfortunately, it always comes back to the money, which us as cybersecurity professionals around the world understand that. They understand that in order to get the business to do anything, you have to tie it to a number. You have to tie it to a value to show that there's some ROI on this, because that's why security was overlooked for so many years, because security didn't have a seat at the board. They didn't have a way to talk about money, so they didn't get any input. But I think compliance is the same way. It's one of those things where in order to grow, usually the people that I see getting their first compliance assessment are starting to start work with bigger customers. You know, when you're working with nothing but startups and small businesses, you probably can get away with not doing anything and govern yourself. But as soon as you start to go upstream a little bit, they're going to start asking these questions.
So that's interesting what you mentioned, the fact that typically what drives this is a transaction.
Yep.
Right. So you get a potential transaction, the larger client requests you to go through certain hoops, whether it's compliance with, or proving otherwise. For example, insurance is one of the areas, right? They have to prove they have a certain amount of insurance to do business. So you're a small firm and you get something like that. I mean, don't you, like, the first reaction is panic, like, and what's then, like, how do they come back and say, okay, we need a company like BiteCheck, or do they look it up, like, and say, okay, let's do a traditional audit? What's kind of the stages of realization that they go through when they get this request from a larger entity?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked, because I think a lot of folks just don't understand kind of how it happens, right? How they go from I need this to actually doing it. And I hope we get to a more proactive state. But right now, the way that it works is, a client's going to come to you and say, hey, for this specific contract, I need you to get a SOC 2 Type 2 by this date. Or if you're working in the retail space, I need you to get a PCI, payment card industry report by this date, or federal, you do FedRAMP. They'll specify, most of the contracts will say, I need you to do this specific type of report. And what I have found for most of my customers in my current company and even before is that they go to Google and say, who does SOC 2? and they just start to poke around and find the person. Or they, cybersecurity professionals are big on finding references. So, they go look in their network, say, hey, can anybody help me out with SOC 2? Then they have a conversation with someone like BiteCheck. And what we do, and most people do this as well, but our process is to accelerate your time from finding out you need this report to finding out what you need to do. Because every single company you reach out to is going to do some form of a readiness to say, here's what the standard says, here's where you're currently at, and here's where you need to go. It's kind of the typical process. And the problem in the compliance industry right now is getting from I need to do a SOC 2 to what is it that I need to fix usually takes like 2 to 3 months. Just because of the time it takes to get a firm scheduled, to, in the old days, auditors to fly to your offices and do all of that nonsense, all the screenshots, document collection, and all that. And we've narrowed that down and been able to get that to a 21-day process, where you can go from not knowing anything to knowing exactly which days through some automation in our platform and things like that. But after the readiness, it's, especially in the SOC 2 perspective, really all the frameworks, it's up to the organization. And this is the part that makes it more beneficial to be proactive, because if you know before you need a SOC 2 what the gaps are and what you need to fix, you can take your time to fix those. Because what if you have to re-architect something? What if you have to change the way you set up your infrastructure? Or what if you have to change the way you do identity and access management? That's going to take a while. And if you have this customer saying you need a report by X date, and you find out that your gaps are going to take maybe 6 months of engineering time to remediate, you're going to have a tough conversation with those customers. And that's the part that adds a lot of time here, is the remediation time frame could take very long. It could be very short, depending on the gaps, but it could take really long. And then after that, you get your report, and it's usually an annual process after that as you continue to go through this assessment on an annual basis. Really, all the frameworks are about annual tests. Some of them do like subset of testing over year, but most of them are just annual reports. But the key there is, readiness first, then you go out and remediate, do some advisory work, right? And then you get your report. And that time frame between readiness and getting the report, it all depends on the organization, which is why it's beneficial to, instead of waiting for somebody to ask you for a SOC 2, go out and find out, how close am I? How close am I to getting a SOC 2, so that when the time comes, you already know exactly where you need to go and how to get there.
So what's the kind of the baseline? You mentioned that there's a gap between, when you start the process and when you come out to the nirvana of like, oh yeah, we're compliant now. What's that baseline look like for most organizations, and why don't they? It's almost like, it sounds like it's the best practice would be when I'm out there researching like authentication methods and trying to revamp my organization security stance, I should definitely just look at what's out there from a compliance standpoint and kind of work towards that. So it should not be like, it's almost like we always say cybersecurity should be an inherent process within development, right? So it seems like the same thing applies for compliance. Compliance should be inherent in the operational, requirements, and it's also inherent in how you go out and look at security technologies. Should not be an afterthought.
Right.
So what's your take on it? What's the kind of the process look like for most organizations? Do they just wake up and say, okay, we need compliance, or how's that work?
Yeah, there's usually, I found two different types of organizations. One is especially if we're talking about small businesses and startups, you have the initial one that is led by some folks that have a few scars. They've been through this a few times. So they know some of the foundational things to put in place. They know how to set up their infrastructure. They know they need to have MFA everywhere. They know they have to encrypt their data at rest. They know they have to have some form of policies and some kind of formal onboarding, offboarding procedures, right? And then there's the other end of the spectrum where they're just building. They're just building, and they're building fast. They've never done this before, so security doesn't even matter. It's not important. It's what can we do? How can we put this all together to get things out as fast as possible? The organizations that, which is the strange part, the organizations that have that kind of understanding are actually the ones that are worse off. And it's because they think that they know more than they do. They think that they understand more than they do. So they're like, yeah, if we just do X, Y, and Z, we'll be fine. And usually that doesn't work, right? They're not fine. Whereas the other ones, they're so bad that you can just start from nothing and say, okay, build it right from here. Do everything right from this point, where the other one, you're kind of trying to change culture and things like that. And to your point, I think even if we're talking just cloud providers, I think a lot of startups get really excited and kind of get SaaS overload. And you buy all these different tools that are going to help out and do all these different things for you. And I think they really, we should start looking directly on the cloud providers. Like, look first natively, figure out what does the cloud provider already have there that you can use, and then layer on top some of these other SaaS vendors, because the cloud providers can't do everything, right? But they can get you started. And too often people, and all the cloud providers have every compliance framework out there attested to. So they at least have taken care of some of the basics for you from that perspective. So I think companies have to start considering the tools that they're using, because sometimes you'll implement a tool and now you have to take out of your whole software kill chain or whatever it may be in your security stack or whatever, because that tool won't help you meet a particular framework. And that's tough, especially if your team gets used to using something and now you got to remove it. Could cause some issues there.
It's so interesting. Would you consider, mentioning to these companies that compliance, despite, being, a sucky kind of thing, can also potentially be a competitive advantage, right? If you are compliant and you flaunt it, right? You say, hey, I have all these certifications. That means that I'm good to go. Like, if you want to do business with me tomorrow, we can sign it. I can prove it. We can sign the paperwork and move on. You don't have to wait for me. Would companies consider that as a kind of a competitive advantage, or is this still like an onus thing where they have to do and they just don't care about it, and just only when the time comes?
Yeah, the companies that have SOC 2s or other compliance frameworks know it's a competitive advantage because they use it and they sell on it. But the companies that haven't quite, or don't think they're ready for it yet, they think that it won't be a competitive advantage. And I think security is becoming more and more of a thing that you can sell on, especially SOC 2. So the reason I keep talking about SOC 2 is that's what I specialize in. That's what my background is. But the cool thing about SOC 2 is that it's a lot more flexible compared to the other frameworks. Whereas like PCI, ISO, FedRAMP, et cetera, they say you must do X, Y, and Z, and your auditor is going to say, did you do X, Y, and Z?
So AJ, can you like just maybe just give a 60-second on SOC 2, since you're like an expert in this? It'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So SOC 2 is a security framework designed to assess service organizations. So anybody providing a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, assess their security across not just technical, but also governance stuff with onboarding, offboarding, risk assessments, anything that you would think about in a security assessment is covered. And it was created by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, which is, you think accountants, why are they in security? Well, they have a set of standards. They have a set of ethical standards and guidelines and reporting standards that outline how these reports are done. So it's going to be objectively handled every single time according to certain standards and oversight and things like that. So the CPAs go out and they have this criteria. The criteria are just, think of them as high-level objectives. They say, hey, you must protect your environment against malicious software. But SOC 2 doesn't tell you how to do that. It doesn't tell you have to install AV or do defense in depth or whatever it may be. It just says do it, that's the beauty of SOC 2, is that it has that flexibility. And in SOC 2, the last thing I'll say on it, David, is, and I can go on SOC 2 all day, so we can have a full conversation if you'd like, but there's 5 categories that you can be evaluated in SOC 2. One's security, then there's availability, confidentiality, process and integrity, and privacy. The most common are security, availability, and confidentiality. And those are exactly what you think about when you think about those words. The only difference is confidentiality in SOC 2 is really focused on what you're doing when a customer leaves your service. Do you delete their data? Do you keep their data? Do you sanitize it? Do you respond to the deletion request? That's really all confidentiality. One of the biggest things confidentiality cares about. But SOC 2 is really big in the US, humongous in the United States when it comes to B2B companies, business to business companies. That's kind of the table stakes. That's what you have to have. You have to get SOC 2 to do business with other businesses. Whereas in Canada or Europe and other places, ISO 27001 is probably the more familiar one out there. But what is cool about SOC 2 is that flexibility. So when we're talking about a competitive advantage, instead of just having a certificate that says I'm ISO 27001 certified, that doesn't really say much. With SOC 2, you have a detailed report that lists out in detail your controls. It says these are the things that this company is doing. And if you have a smart auditor or a technical auditor that understands your cloud environment, your report can have some custom security stuff in there that really shows, oh, wow, this company doesn't just do regular MFA. They're doing all these other things. Or they're not just doing traditional change management. They're doing all these other things that are really cool. And that's where SOC 2 becomes a differentiator, because you can go tell your prospective customers, hey, yeah, we're hosted on AWS, but look at these 50 other things that we're doing on top of it that are helping us make our stuff more secure. Go ask our competitor if they're doing the same thing. And that's what those mature companies that understand how to use the SOC 2 framework to their advantage, that's what they're doing. They're selling on that type of security.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So, let's say I'm a CEO of a SaaS company, and I'm watching this video, and I'm like, wow, AJ sounds like he knows what he's talking about. I need to have like some call to action. What would be like the best bang for the buck in terms of like, pick like, one compliance framework or, certification and go after that. What would that be? A SOC 2 compliance?
I think the reason being is because in a SOC 2, one, you can get a readiness for fairly cheap, especially if you find startups to work with that have some friendly pricing, right? But the other thing is that SOC 2 in the report, there's a thing called Section 5. In Section 5, it's an unaudited section. It's called Other Information Provided by Management. And in that section, you can map to other frameworks. So you can take your SOC 2 controls that were just audited by a third party and say, all of my SOC 2 controls are mapped to HIPAA or to ISO or to PCI. So now your one report that you did for SOC 2 can show your customers like, hey, at least I have some controls in place that address these other frameworks. If you want me to actually pursue an assessment in those, I'll go do it. But before companies go commit $20,000, $30,000 on a PCI, HIPAA, whatever, they can just use SOC 2 to kind of test the waters with their sales reps. Hey, sales reps, pass this SOC 2 around with the Section 5. If people keep asking about HIPAA, let us know and we'll go and invest the $20,000, $30,000 into it. But oftentimes, companies get a little bit of money in the bank. Maybe they get an investment and they go and say, I'm going to get SOC 2, PCI, FedRAMP, HIPAA, CSA Star, and their customers only care about one. And they're only going to, so then now you just invested all this time, resources, you hired compliance folks, you hired security professionals, all these different people that needed to solely focus on compliance when you only needed to do one thing. So I would say to get the most, especially if you're doing it proactive. If you're doing it reactive, obviously do the compliance assessment that they're asking for. But if you're doing it proactive, SOC 2 gives you the most flexibility because you won't have to change anything. SOC 2 doesn't come in and say you have to do X, Y, and Z. We figure out in our conversations during readiness, if it would be just like this, David, I'd be like, hey, so how do you do onboarding? He'd be like, oh, I bring them on, I do this and that. I'd be like, cool. What you just said there, that's a control. Oh, what you just said there, that's a control. And that's the conversation. It's just figuring out what are you currently doing And then we, the compliance professionals, the folks of us that love compliance, we take that information and we map it to compliance and say, or map it to SOC 2 criteria and say, okay, now just make sure you do that every time. You told me that you do background checks every single time someone's hired, do that. Or you told me you do an access request form every time someone's brought on and you outline what they have access to. Do that every single time. We're going to make sure we test that at the end of your period coming up. So SOC 2, I think, gives you the most bang for your buck because of the flexibility and then also the way that you can take it and map it to other frameworks.
Yeah, that's quite the sound advice, and I think that this the environment is always changing. It might be we might be having the same conversation 6 months from now. You're gonna offer some other advice because it's dynamic.
Yep.
So we talked about previously about being an entrepreneur, running your own company. The fact that you can have a good day and a bad day the same day, and the fact that also that you have to become a bit of a storyteller, right? Like you have to, that's how you kind of motivate people to work with you and so on. So maybe you can share like a success story, and then maybe things that maybe a story that wasn't so successful that you could kind of share with us, that just to show the fact that it's not all rosy, like on the way to the top.
Yeah, I think the thing about being an entrepreneur, like you said, it's the craziest thing because you can have a good day and a bad day in the same day. You can literally have those type of roller coaster of emotions. And I think the thing that I've learned the most about over this last year of doing this is resiliency. You have to understand that when you feel like you're on top of the world, you're not. And when you feel like the world is crashing down on top of you, it's not. You're probably somewhere in the middle there. And I would say, every entrepreneur, especially in the software space, you lose deals. As an early founder, early stage where we're at, losing deals it sucks, especially because of the investment that it takes just to propose on a deal and get a customer in the pipeline right now at this stage. It's huge investment. And then when you lose one to a competitor, that is the market leader in the space, that's the days that suck. But the thing that has been really cool for me lately, and it wasn't the case early on because there wasn't anybody around. It was just me and my co-founder on Zoom together, right? But nowadays having more and more team members, growing the team and bringing people on board. We recently sent somebody in the news that we're hiring them, and they cried when I called them. They broke down in tears, and it helps to put things in perspective that you're not just building something to make money. You're not just building something to deals. You're building something that hopefully is going to impact people's lives for a very long time, whether or not by check lasts forever or for a year. This experience that they're getting working at a startup and us just being in the position to hire people, pay them money is crazy. It's pretty cool. So the thing that keeps me going, the thing that I think fuels me is my people. I think that goes back to my Army background. I was a 23-year-old second lieutenant that was in charge of 30 soldiers, and we deployed shortly thereafter. So you learn very quickly the importance of taking care of your people. And obviously in the military, it's a little bit more serious. You have lives. It's the difference between life and death. But it still all comes back to people and how you treat people. And for me, it motivates me. I wake up at 4 a.m. every day. And the reason isn't because I love waking up at 4 a.m. It's because I have work to do. But the reason I'm able to get up is because of my people. I want to make sure I hold up my end of the bargain to them because of the belief they put into what we're building here. And that's the other thing about entrepreneurship. Me waking up at 4 a.m. isn't unique for most entrepreneurs. They're either waking up super early or they're staying up super late. One of the two's happening, and the thing that doesn't happen is sleep. You don't sleep. You don't know what a weekend is. You don't know what a holiday is. There's no such thing as off days. And I think entrepreneurship has been, glamorized for a while. People talk so much about, oh, be an entrepreneur, go do that. And I'm like, well, first, let's figure out what you're going to be an entrepreneur about. Because this is something that I always tell folks when I'm talking about this is I needed to get the experience that I had to withstand some of the highs and lows. And a very simple example is in the space that I'm in, the SaaS space, when people are spending, five figures on your deals, on deal sizes, it takes a while for those to close. Those aren't things that close in a couple of days. This isn't something somebody's going to go to your website and click buy, and you're going to get a check. So you have to understand that the sales cycles are long, right? It's going to take a while sometimes. You're going to have to talk to somebody in November, and they might not close till the end of January, and you have to be patient. But I didn't know that 3 years ago. I learned that over time.
Yeah, and AJ, in the meantime, there's payroll. As you mentioned, you're now responsible for the people that you hired and also for their family members as well, right? It's not just, there's a circle, around them they're responsible for. And maybe that's also, makes you wake up at 4 because it's the responsibility is there.
Yep, exactly.
And I agree with you. It's not, it's not glamorous. Even if you see the folks that are, ringing the bell, NASDAQ, right? At the win IPO, there's a lot that went through that process. And sometimes it's also not overnight. If you look at some of these companies, been around for like 10 years, it's a 10, 15 years even. So it's not like it's an overnight thing. How long have you guys been around?
We launched publicly November 11th. So we started building things almost a year ago or so, last summer. But we've only been in business since November 11th, so a little over 3 months now.
Amazing. But you already, it's amazing. You are, you contribute back to the information security space. You're a speaker, and first of all, I can tell like you're super passionate. Like just, you make compliance like feel like, oh, this is an amazing process, and it shows. It shows how passionate you are about compliance. So if you had, if you could like put your head on the rails and hear what's coming, what's the next train coming from a compliance perspective, what would that be? Do you feel that there's certain compliance frameworks that are coming down the pipe that companies should be aware of?
Yeah, I hope there's no more compliance frameworks, to be honest. I think we have too many. Actually, I'll give you, I have an idea for one more. I'll tell you that's what I think. I hope it's coming down the pipe. But right now, CMMC is huge in the U.S. It's one of the biggest. It's for government defense contractors. I think it's cybersecurity maturity. I don't know what it stands for. CMMC. It's based off of NIST, But I would say I think just from an overall compliance space, right? The cybersecurity compliance space, it's automation. Companies are going to continue to demand automation, and then auditors are going to start to use automation. So if you're one of those folks in the compliance space that's still fighting, using APIs and automating evidence collection, and you still want to do sample testing, you're going to get left behind. The compliance space is finally, it's taken a while. I've been waiting for a very long time, but finally the compliance space is catching up, and they're ready to come on board and start to automate things. So I think that's the biggest thing that's coming down the pipeline. The other thing is the report that I was talking about. So I think that there needs to be a new report, and this report needs to be focused on automated cloud security, because there's so many things in the cloud that if you read about breaches, for example, AWS S3 bucket breaches, how many times have we heard that?
So trivial almost, when you think about it.
It's crazy. The fact that people are like getting breached, big companies. And this is something that's preventable. You can literally set this to auto remediate very easily. So I think there should be a report that come out that are more frequent, that are testing, do you have automated security mechanisms in place? Do you do automated security testing in your development process? Or do you really have DevSecOps implemented? And that report is something that can be done every 3 months, something that can be done in an automated fashion. And that provides, I think, if I'm me as a CEO and I'm reaching out to a software company, I want to do business with them, and I want to know if they're secure. I don't want their SOC too. I want to talk to somebody and say, hey, tell me about how you protect S3 buckets. Where's my data stored? Okay, how do you protect that? Tell me the actual how, because the SOC 2 report is going to say data stores encrypted at rest. What does that mean? How are you doing it? How do I know when you create a new database that's going to happen again? And how do I know what alerting and stuff you have in place? So I think we need a more modern framework. We need something, and somebody's going to hear this probably and go create it and make a lot of money, because these frameworks are it's just so great, how much money they make. But I think we need something that's more modern and focused on true cloud security, true automation, because right now these frameworks have been around for years and years, but the way things are done are so different now, especially security. Security has just changed so much that a lot of one-off tasks that you used to want to test, like you shouldn't even do that anymore. You need to use technology to test it in the right way.
Yeah, and you're also interesting. You mentioned APIs and also the supply chain, right? Where it's almost today there's almost no chance of you to work in a bubble. You're always partnering with someone else, and now you inherently carry some of the risk associated with these guys, and their compliance. So
Yep.
it's never like a standalone way, like, okay, you're compliant, you're done. You have to be compliant throughout the supply chain, with third and fourth and nth type of relationship as well. Just kind of to wrap up, and we're kind of running out of time, and it's been really fascinating. We should probably do maybe a session about a specific kind of a SOC, or SOC 2 or framework or others. Yeah. So you're in business, you open the doors. Who is the best potential clients for you? Because we talked about this, beware for what you ask for. You've seen cases where you sign up with a very, very large customer and didn't end well. So who is your best client right now?
Yeah, we're focused on building our solutions and methodology for startups, small businesses, folks that don't have the capital just yet to invest in a bunch of security professionals. Maybe aren't hiring a compliance manager just yet, but they need to understand their security posture, especially if they're hosted in the cloud. So that's who we're committed to, and our services, our pricing, and everything are reflective of that. So we're startup friendly from a pricing perspective, small business friendly from a pricing perspective, and those are who we're targeting. And I think for every entrepreneur, the important lesson is to know who you want to work with from a type of company perspective, because some industries or some type of companies, you can only work with one industry. You can only work with healthcare or government. Fortunately for us in SOC 2, it covers every industry, but you have to know that if you're an entrepreneur. The other thing is know who's too big for you. Don't pick up a customer that is going to drain your company at a very early stage. And I think that's some mistakes that, you have to know the power of no. You have to learn to say no to the right customers, because you don't want to take on an enterprise client that expects you to be an enterprise company. Because they're enterprise, they have thousands of employees, so they expect their software, their partners to work a certain way. And if you're not working that way, it can be detrimental to you as a founder, detrimental to your employees, and really to the growth of your company. So understanding who you're targeting, we could probably do a whole session on that as well, David. But that's who we're focused on: startups, small businesses, don't have a security person on staff. And if you're hosted in the cloud, we're the perfect folks for you, because that's what we focus on. We focus on true cloud security. Even if you don't need a SOC 2, our platform will help you assess your security controls and overall governance program.
And I love it. Like I said, I think you're going to do great. Just the fact that you're so passionate about this and you're passionate about the folks you work with. We need more of that. I think that, if you look at historically speaking, some companies, I'm not going to name names, the founders were very mean to their employees. And I think that's not necessarily the case. You can be like, it can be great to your employees and grow the business to $1 billion business, just doing that as well. And we need more compassion, and especially these times. So it's been absolutely great. Where can people find you? Somebody wants to even just having consultation, talk shop about compliance and so on. What's the best way?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can find me just AJ Yan on LinkedIn. I just got on Twitter, so if you're on Twitter, you can find me also at AJ Yan there. I'm responsive. I'm not one of those. I'm still not used to being a CEO, so I respond to everybody. I guess that's not wise, but I try to respond to everybody and at least chat with you. And if there's anybody out there that's trying to get into the field or looking for someone for some advice, I still dedicate 4 hours a week to mentorship to anybody. So if you reach out to me, I'll send you a link. I think right now it's booked through like March 26th or something. So you might have to wait a little bit for that time. But every week I give back 4 hours to give back to anybody that's willing to hear me pontificate on cloud security and cybersecurity.
That's incredible. Highly recommend. So AJ, thank you again for joining and be part of this group. I would love to take you on and maybe do a session about a specific framework and talk shop a little bit more. It's been absolutely great to have you today.
Yep. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks all for joining. See you at the next event.